Allora, Gnosis Acropolis, the power of collective intelligence, and now I'm honored to have here the Dr. Forte. Listen to me, listen what I'm saying now. You are agree with me with this concept that now I explain to you. In this society, we have the possibility to give to every fact different opinion. In one fact, I have an opinion, you have an opinion. In the next future, the line that separate the reality and the imagination will be not so clear. Narration is a word, and this word is not a biological organism. Narration is not an organism that can prove, that can suffer, that can enjoy, but the narration can give a lot of influence to the reality. So what do you think about?
Wow, well, Fabio, you've said so many things here, and if I understand you, you want me to make a few comments about the power and the possibility of psychedelic drugs to address spiritual problems and help us understand the difference between reality and imagination. Is that a?
Yes.
Okay, so psychedelic drugs are a very, very vast subject. These are drugs that have been used since the very beginning of history to commune with other levels of reality, to commune directly with gods and goddesses, other supernatural beings, to experience religious mysteries, to have a glimpse of immortality, to face death and rebirth. I mean, there are so many very, very powerful experiential effects of psychedelic drugs. I could talk about them for a long time. It's also true that these drugs have the opposite effects. In some cases, they're used to expand consciousness into these religious dimensions, but in other cases, these drugs have been used to suppress consciousness, to distract consciousness, to control populations. This is not unique in the history of religion. As you know, we're talking, and you're in Rome, one of the great centers of Catholicism. We know from studying the history of religion that sometimes religion is the greatest thing in humanity. It sets goals and aspirations and gives us ethical teachings and inspires us, provides healing techniques and mystical practices. But religion is also is the worst of humanity. Within the history of religion, we see the worst of humanity. We see religion being used to control populations, or used as a justification for war or genocide, or greed or power, and some people are very illuminated by religion, and yet some people become very confused and controlled by it. And so the subject of psychedelic drugs is like a subset of this field of religion. And so one needs to be very careful when they talk about the effects of psychedelic drugs, because, as I said, they can be used for the wrong reasons. Now, so this gets back to your question here about reality and imagination. This has been one of the very great questions of psychedelic history, whether the effects of these drugs are hallucinations, or whether they are visions, whether the alteration of consciousness results in a revelation of other levels of reality, or whether these experiences create just an illusion, or a like temporary psychosis. And so we have both of these things within this subject of psychedelic drugs. Now, I don't know if I'm talking to your question or not, but does this begin to set the conversation in the direction you'd like to go?
Yes, but the point is, what do you think about the future? The future, there will be an introduction of this type of psychedelic drug in the society or not? And what kind of use, and what is the relation with the ethics?
Well, these are all very important questions because, right now, especially in the United States and in the United Kingdom, as far as I know, maybe in Italy as well, we're seeing what people are calling a renaissance of psychedelics. These drugs were very popular in the 1960s, and then they kind of faded from view, from being used by research or by legally. And now there's this tremendous wave of interest coming back, and there's universities in the United States, the very best universities in the United States, and the very best universities in the United Kingdom, and in Switzerland, and all over the place. There's a renaissance, and people are investigating these things. The mainstream media in the United States, especially, which I read, but also in the United Kingdom, are popularizing these drugs. We're seeing all these articles about how fantastic LSD is again. And not only LSD, but the psilocybin mushroom, which really started this revolution in the 1950s. And also there is a tremendous growing popularity of ayahuasca, which is a drink that comes from South America, that it's used in shamanism there. And so this is a quite unique occurrence to see these drugs so endorsed enthusiastically by the mainstream media, advertising their effects in treating depression, in helping soldiers overcome trauma in battle, all kinds of therapeutic possibilities. And this is something that we should be grateful for, because these drugs have such fantastic properties, and they can be used to heal and expand consciousness. But at the same time, we have to be aware of another shadow aspect of how these drugs can be used and how they have been used in history. And so I want to call your attention to one of the first books in modern history on the psychedelic drugs by an English writer named Aldous Huxley, who in 1937 wrote a very important novel called Brave New World. And Brave New World was a novel about the future, about a future society where it's a pyramid society, where most of the wealth and power is controlled by a very small number of people at the top. And most people live not sharing the commonwealth, but more as slaves to this elite force. And Huxley thought that in the future, the people below would not revolt, would not even be able to muster a democratic response to this tyranny, because they would become distracted. These elites at the top would force them to take these drugs, this drug called soma, which was like a psychedelic drug, and they would recommend that people not only take this drug soma, but that they would go on these soma holidays and have wild sexual parties and these psychedelic experiences that gave them the sense that everything was okay.
In one side we have pleasure. If we are in a situation where we suffer, we want to go away. Where we are in a state of pleasure, we want to expand this situation. Is possible that with the introduction of this in the future we reach to stay in this situation of pleasure independently with the happen to us in the reality? What do you think?
No, I don't think that's possible. I think that pain and pleasure and happiness and suffering are much more intertwined, and that no drug is going to make you feel permanently happy. That they can be used to heal situations, but one of the ways psychedelic drugs psychedelic drugs they're not always pleasurable. The experience of the psychedelic experience oftentimes is a very direct and radical confrontation with the pain that you're holding on to, or certain, facts of existence, dying or reliving of a trauma, or understanding the global crisis, or identifying with other people. So it's not, I wouldn't say psychedelic drugs are going to help prolong pleasure.
All the Buddhism speak about this. You must observe. You must not identify with the situation. Is it possible to reach the same thing that this spiritual technique want to reach with a pharmacological manner?
Yeah, well, I think that the psychedelic drugs can certainly illuminate this process of awakening that you're talking about. They can definitely be used skillfully to facilitate this sort of awakening that you're talking about. No question about that. How often that happens is another question. And I hesitate to say it because I don't like to advertise for these drugs. I think there is a lot of hyping going on in modern society, as I said, through the media, to lure more people into taking these drugs, when I think it's really better that a small number of people who are more carefully prepared for these powerful effects, that we're lately in this renaissance, there's a lot of overhype about them. This is my opinion. Yes, it's true, it's powerful, they can illuminate this process, but they're being overstated. In my mind, it's like one of my meditation teachers once said, it's like playing the lottery. A lot of people play the lottery, but not so many people win. And so drugs can give you a glimpse of the functioning of the mind and its relationship to the realm of the sacred.
Great. No one in the world knows what is consciousness.
Well, I think that you're right, that there are a lot of points of view on consciousness. There are a lot of definitions of consciousness, but I would disagree that no one knows what it is. It's something that pick out a meaning, and then you build from there. You know, like what is the relationship between another word here, like consciousness? I like to use the word awareness. Consciousness and awareness are kind of similar. And there are a lot of, you know, in Buddhism system that I've become familiar with, you know, there's a whole model for how consciousness interacts with other factors that brings the world into being. And consciousness, in this sense, is awareness, the individual's awareness of something. Now, it could be of any one of the 6 senses: light, you know, awareness of light, awareness of touch, awareness of smell, right? And then there's also awareness of sound, of course, and then awareness of ideas, mental concepts. Like if I say to you, if I say the word democracy, you're aware of what I mean. It's not something that you were able to touch or smell or taste, but it's something that you're aware of.
Yes,
so
yes.
This is one sort of consciousness. And this consciousness can also become aware of itself. There's a consciousness of just consciousness, pure awareness. And this, you know, we're getting into a discussion now of that's, you know, maybe a little hard to follow for people that haven't had practice in meditation and learning these ways of looking at inner experience. So
yes. And what do you think about this? A lot of people say that this is the sanctuary in what we will change from an organic life modulated with the natural law in an inorganic life modulated with intelligent design.
You mean robots and artificial intelligence and transhumanism?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I don't really have a feel for that kind of stuff myself. I don't really go there. I'm more interested in organic life and natural consciousness and consciousness that we may share with plants and spirits. I've never really studied or gone into any of this transhuman stuff. I'm very much a human. Maybe you mean 5-MeO DMT?
Yes. What is this?
Well, let's be sure we're talking about the same thing. 5-MeO DMT can be both synthetic or natural. It occurs in nature. It occurs in the fluids of a species of toad. It also occurs in some plants. It's one of the constituents of ayahuasca, which I mentioned before. And when you take just pure 5-methoxy-DMT, whether you snort it or smoke it, it's a very, very powerful, very brief experience that there are a whole range of possibilities, from an experience of seeming dissolution into a cosmic consciousness to feeling like you've died and gone out of your body into other realms where you've encountered other beings. It's also it can be very, very powerfully healing. I know people that have used it that have been cured of lifelong addictions to toxic drugs like cigarettes or alcohol. And but it can also become a point of real confusion for a person. You know, something that is so powerful like that. You know, maybe a good example is like sexuality. You know, a person can make love, and in the very highest and most powerful, best case, that communion experience with another person or people is the most wonderful thing that happens in life. But it can also be very disruptive to a person if it's done in an abusive or exploitive way. And so the DMT experience is like that too.
Yes.
Any drug experience, DMT is just the most powerful and the most direct way into these extraordinary states of consciousness that perhaps can be called sacred. LSD will do that, the mushroom will do that, peyote, mescaline will do that. But it takes a very lucky and carefully prepared person to really derive the maximum spiritual or transformative benefit from these drugs.
This type of drugs in the future will be used or not? And this type of drugs...
There'll be a lot of people to use them, more and more. There'll be a whole range of possibilities. Yeah, there'll be both effects. There'll be positive effects and there'll be confused effects.
Yes, very good.
Both.